Hello, and welcome back. The story we're exploring tonight is based on chilling events and staff accounts from a major television studio right in Hong Kong. We know actors work very late, but all crew members swear that something stays behind after the studio lights go out. Security guards reported seeing monitors turn on by themselves, playing footage of actors who've been dead for years. But the truly terrifying detail is what they recorded on a hot mic left in an empty dressing room. I'm going to break down exactly what they heard, so make sure you subscribe. You don't want to miss this. Leon was not a star, not at all. He was, in his most honest moments, what they call just a face. He was the face that looked vaguely concerned in a pharmaceutical ad, the face that smiled at a new brand of yogurt, or like today, the face of office worker number 3, who had a single line of dialogue in a corporate training video. He was an ordinary character, a working actor in a city full of them, and his purpose was brutally simple: work. He worked to pay his rent, to afford his instant ramen, and to keep the distant, flickering dream of a real role alive, and that's all. His simple purpose for today had begun at 6:00 a.m. The call time was unforgiving. The shoot was in a sterile, sprawling studio complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. For 18 hours, he had sat at a grey desk under lights so hot they felt like they were cooking his skin. He had said his line, "I'll have those reports ready by Tuesday, Mr. Wong," 144 times. The director wanted it peppier, then more serious. Then, with a note of quiet desperation, Leon had given them every variation, his smile feeling less like an expression and more like a mask he was struggling to hold up. By the time the assistant director finally yelled, "That's a wrap for background," it was 12:07 a.m. The manufactured energy of the set evaporated instantly. The massive lights clicked off, plunging the soundstage into a gloomy twilight. The crew, a well-oiled machine, began tearing down the office, revealing the raw, unpainted wood and scaffolding beneath. It was the part of the job Leon hated most. The sudden, jarring return to a reality that was just a cold, empty warehouse. He was exhausted. It was a bone-deep weariness, a physical weight that pressed down on his shoulders and made his eyelids feel like they were lined with sand. All he wanted was to sign his timesheet, get in his aging sedan, and drive home. But the thought of the 1-hour drive, navigating the empty highways, was daunting. He just needed 10 minutes. 10 minutes to close his eyes and let the buzzing in his skull subside. He shuffled past the main dressing rooms, which were already dark. He was one of the last to leave. Near the exit, he saw a metal door, propped open with a rubber wedge. The sign on it was simple, unassuming: Resting Room C. This was the normal, relatable environment. It wasn't for the stars. It was for the crew, the extras, the people who needed a moment away from the noise. It was a place that could exist in any office building, any hospital, any school. Leon pushed the heavy, soundproof door. It swung open with a sigh of pressurized air. The room was exactly as he expected: small, windowless, and aggressively silent. The air was still and smelled of stale coffee and industrial upholstery cleaner. 2 cheap, vinyl sofas faced each other across a low, scuffed coffee table covered in out-of-date industry magazines. A single, dim, fluorescent light hummed in the ceiling. Nothing else. No art, no windows, no personality. It was a void. It was perfect. He pushed the door closed. It shut with a heavy, final thud, and the hydraulic closer hissed, sealing him inside. The silence was immediate and total. The distant noises of the crew striking the set were gone, muffled into non-existence by the thick door. He didn't bother with the light switch. He navigated by the glow of his phone, tossed his bag onto one sofa, and collapsed onto the other. The vinyl was cool against his cheek and squeaked in protest under his weight. He set his alarm for 15 minutes. He was still half awake, his mind replaying his single line, reports by Tuesday, reports by Tuesday. When he began to drift, he was in that murky, heavy state just before sleep, where the world fades to a comfortable blur. It was in that silence that he heard the first voice. He's here again. It was a whisper, a deep, dry, papery sound. It was so close. It sounded like it was right next to his ear. Leon's body went rigid. His heart, which had been slowing to a resting beat, gave a single violent thump that felt like a punch from the inside. He didn't move. He told himself it was the crew, outside in the hallway, but the door was heavy, soundproofed. He hadn't heard it open. Then, the second voice. It was deeper, slower, and seemed to come from the other sofa, just a few feet away. Should we wake him up? He froze. This was not a dream. This was not the crew. The voices were in the room with him. They were low, intimate, and held a strange, conversational tone, as if he were merely an object they were observing. His heart stopped. The adrenaline was so potent it was acidic, burning in his veins. But it didn't make him move. It paralyzed him. He lay there, feigning sleep, his eyes clamped shut, his entire body a single, screaming nerve. He was listening. The silence that followed was worse than the whispers. It was a thick, expectant, breathing silence. He could feel the simple, mundane environment, the windowless room, the two sofas, the coffee table, recontextualize itself. It was no longer a resting room. It was a box. He had to see. He had to know. With a desperate surge of will, he opened his eyes. No one was there. The room was exactly as it was, dimly lit by the glow of his phone screen on the table. The other sofa was empty, its black vinyl gleaming faintly. There was no one standing by his head. There was no one sitting across from him. He sat up, the vinyl sofa letting out a long, agonizing squeak in the dead quiet. "Hello?" he whispered. His voice was hoarse. Nothing. He scrambled to his feet and backed against the wall, his eyes darting to the only two places someone could hide, under the coffee table and under the sofas. Empty, empty. No door sound, no footsteps, nothing. This was the thought that chilled him more than the voices. No one had entered. No one had left. The heavy door was a seal. "I'm tired," he said aloud to the empty room. I'm overtired." It was the only possible, logical explanation. A hypnagogic hallucination, a stress dream that had leaked into the waking world. It happens. This could happen to anyone. He snatched his bag from the other sofa. He needed to leave. Now. He fumbled for the door handle. A heavy, cold steel bar. He pushed it down and pulled the door open, nearly falling backward into the hallway. The hallway was bright, empty, and buzzing with the familiar sound of a distant ventilation fan. It was real. It was normal. He leaned against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked back into resting room C. It was just a room, small, windowless, silent. Two sofas and a coffee table. Nothing else. It looked pathetic, not terrifying. He was just tired. He had to be. That night, he left the studio, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He drove home with the radio on full blast, needing the noise to drown out the memory of the silence. He never stepped inside that room again. He told the production manager he preferred to wait in his car. But for months afterward, whenever he was in a small, quiet room, he would find himself listening. He would hear the memory of those two deep, whispering voices. And he would always remember the terrifying implication of the first three words. He's here again. Months had passed since the incident in room 304. The building's management had threatened lawsuits, the online forums had buzzed with theories, and then, as all such things do, the furor had faded. The apartment was just an apartment again, albeit one that landlords struggled to rent, for the producers of a low-budget horror series. However, it was a godsend. It was cheap. It came with a built-in backstory. and its cramped, water-stained ambience was something no set designer could authentically replicate. This is how Eliza Chan, an actress with a pragmatic soul and a growing profile, found herself in the very room that had birthed a local legend. She was playing the doomed friend in a reenactment, and room 304 was her designated waiting area between a grueling 14-hour shooting schedule. The crew, mostly young men hopped up on energy drinks and filmmaking bravado, joked about the place. They dare each other to stand in the bathroom and say a name 3 times. Eliza found it juvenile. She wasn't a believer, she was a professional. And right now, she was exhausted. Her scene wasn't for another 2 hours. The director told her to get some rest. She eyed the small, rickety cot pushed against the wall. It would have to do. The room was stuffy, smelling of old dust and the faint, sour tang of mildew. She cracked the window, but the city air offered little relief. She kicked off her shoes and turned to the door. As she pushed the flimsy wooden door shut, she reached for the simple knob lock. Before her fingers could even brush the metal, she heard it, a distinct, solid click, as the deadbolt above the knob slid firmly into place. Eliza froze, her hand hovering in the air. She stared at the bolt. It was fully engaged. She hadn't touched it. A nervous laugh escaped her. "Right," she muttered. Force of habit. Must have done it without thinking. She was, after all, profoundly tired. Her limbs felt heavy, her mind foggy. It was the only explanation. Or perhaps the PA, seeing her go in, had locked it from the outside with a key for her privacy. That seemed plausible, even thoughtful. She was safe. She was just tired. But the lock was an internal deadbolt. There was no keyhole on the outside. The heavy brass had moved with a deliberation that force of habit could not explain. The room had not been secured for her. It had secured her within it. She shook off the feeling, a sudden, cold prickle on her scalp, and blamed it on the script she'd been reading. Too much horror. She turned her attention back to the cot. Sleep was what she needed, but Eliza had a deep, almost primal hatred of the dark, a childhood nyctophobia that had never quite left her. She couldn't sleep in pitch black. The room's main light was a harsh, buzzing fluorescent, but the tiny, grimy kitchenette alcove had a small bulb over the sink. She flicked it on. It cast a sickly, dim yellow glow over the peeling linoleum. It was just enough. She lay down on the cot, the springs groaning in protest. The kitchenette light was still too bright, shining directly into her eyes. She sighed, frustrated. She closed her eyes, trying to force the rest. But the buzzing from the kitchenette light was impossible to ignore. It wasn't the steady, monotonous drone of old wiring. It seemed to pulse, to wax and wane. Bzzz. Pause. Bzzz. Pause. It was rhythmic, almost biological. It sounded, she thought with a sudden chill, like an insect breathing. Eliza opened her eyes, glaring at the offending light. Faulty ballast, she diagnosed aloud, her voice sounding flat in the dead air. Old buildings were full of electrical problems. She'd stayed in far worse motels on tour. It was annoying, certainly, but it wasn't sinister. It was just a sound. She could block it out. She just needed to focus. The rhythm was too perfect. It wasn't a flaw in the current. It was an intelligence in the wiring. It was a mimicry of life, a low, electrical hum that seemed to be listening, waiting, and watching her try to rest. The sound was an anchor, holding the room's attention on its new guest. Despite her rationalization, her heart was beating in time with the unnatural pulse of the light. She sat up, running a hand through her hair. She was letting the crew's ghost stories get to her. Pathetic, she chided herself. She needed to block the light. She rummaged in her duffel bag and pulled out a small, white hand towel. It was clean, smelling faintly of detergent. Perfect. She lay back down, her body rigid with a tension she refused to acknowledge. As she was about to drape the towel over her face, she caught a flicker of movement. From her position on the cot, She had a clear view of the small, square bathroom mirror just a few feet away. In the dim, grimy reflection, she saw a shape, a dark, indistinct form, move quickly behind her own reflection. It wasn't her moving, it was something else, slipping from the edge of the mirror out of frame. Her breath hitched. She shot up into a sitting position, her head snapping toward the bathroom. Nothing, just an empty, tiled space, a stained shower curtain hanging limply. She stared at the mirror. Only her own wide-eyed, pale face stared back. "The light," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. It was the light. That pulsing, flickering bulb. It was creating shadows, playing tricks on her peripheral vision, a strobe effect. Combined with her exhaustion, it was a simple hallucination. She was a performer. She knew how light and shadow could deceive. The shape in the mirror had been solid. It had substance. It wasn't a trick of the light, but a thing using the light to mask its presence. It had been observing her from the bathroom, and now, seeing her prepare to cover her eyes, it was moving closer. Her entire body was now a live wire of adrenaline. The rational part of her brain was screaming sleep deprivation, but the animal part was screaming danger. She was angry at her fear. She was an actress, not a victim. Defiantly, she lay back down. She would rest. She draped the thin cotton towel over her face, covering her eyes, nose, and mouth. The world went dark, muffled, and close. The yellow light was gone, replaced by the smell of laundry soap. The rhythmic buzzing of the bulb faded. There was only the sound of her own breathing, hot and damp beneath the cloth. She forced her muscles to unclench. Her heartbeat began to slow. She started to drift, sinking into the desperate, shallow sleep of the overtired. Minutes passed, or perhaps only seconds. She was in that fragile state between consciousness and sleep when she heard it. A voice. It was not a dream. It was not from the hallway. It was in the room, right next to the cot. It was a dry, papery whisper, so close she could almost feel the cold breath of it. Is that a man or a woman? Eliza's blood turned to ice. She stopped breathing. Her body was paralyzed, locked in a state of primal terror. It's the crew. Her mind shrieked. They're playing a prank. They put a speaker in the room. Then, a second voice replied. It sounded different, younger, higher pitched, but with the same dead rattling quality. It's a woman. A cold pressure, like a single, icy finger, brushed the hair back from her temple. She felt it. She felt it. The first voice was insistent, argumentative. No, it looks like a man. The jaw is strong. I can't tell. A pause filled the tiny room. A silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Eliza lay under the towel, her eyes squeezed shut. Tears of pure, unadulterated horror streaming down her temples into her hair. She prayed. She didn't even know to what. Then the first voice spoke again, its tone shifting from curiosity to clinical decision. Take the towel off and check. That was the breaking point, the implication of action. The thought of what she would see, what would be looking down at her when the towel was removed, was more than her mind could bear. She felt the air above her face shift, the barest hint of movement as something reached for the cloth. She didn't wait to be checked. With a raw, choked scream that ripped from her throat, Eliza ripped the towel away herself, lashing out, her arms flailing at the empty air. Her eyes flew open, darting wildly in the dim, pulsing yellow light. Nothing. The room was empty, utterly, completely still. The smell of dust and mildew returned. The light buzzed its incessant, broken rhythm. Bzzz. Pause. Bzzz. She scrambled off the cot, crab-walking backward until her back hit the far wall, her eyes fixed on the spot where the voices had been. The room was too small. There was nowhere to hide. The tiny closet was open and empty. The bathroom was visible. The door. She lunged for it, her fingers fumbling with the deadbolt. The brass was cold. It was still locked. From the inside, She tore it open and fell into the hallway, screaming, hysterics tearing through her. A production assistant found her moments later, curled in a ball, hyperventilating, unable to form words, pointing a trembling finger back into the empty, waiting darkness of room 304. She ran. She left her bag, her script, her dignity. She ran from the building and never returned. From that day forward, Eliza Chan, an actress who made her living pretending to be scared, never napped alone again. The simple, comforting act of covering her face with a towel to block the light had become an act of profound and unbearable terror. A heavy silence descended upon the small, cluttered dressing room, pressing down on the younger actors, Alex and May. The faint smell of old costumes and dust, usually a comforting backdrop to their work, now seemed thick and suffocating. The senior actor, Mr. Ho, a man of few words and immense presence, had been quiet all evening, observing as the younger pair recounted the unsettling events of the last hour, the sound of small footsteps echoing from an empty soundstage. The props for tomorrow's scene found rearranged in a perfect, neat line. A child's faint giggle caught on a hot mic that had no business being live. Then Mr. Ho had spoken. "It happened to me too." He stared past them, his gaze fixed on the peeling paint of the opposite wall, his mind clearly decades away. He described the incident from years earlier, when he had fallen asleep on the very couch May was now perched nervously upon. He recounted waking to the sight of two young boys, their hair neatly parted, their uniforms immaculate, khaki shorts, crisp white shirts. He remembered the surreal politeness of the one who spoke. "Uncle, wake up. They're waiting for you at the studio." He recalled his gratitude, his assumption they were child actors for a different project. He remembered the hollow realization when he reached the set, the crew's blank stares when he asked about the children. And he remembered, with a clarity that chilled the room, walking back to the hallway. Empty, silent, the air too still to breathe. He concluded, his voice barely a whisper. May pulled her knees to her chest. "But they were nice," she offered, her voice small. "They just woke you up." Mr. Zhuo's eyes slowly refocused, landing on her. A deep, profound sadness filled them. "They were polite," he corrected gently. "That isn't the same as being nice. They were performing, like actors. They were playing the part of helpful children." Alex, who had been trying to rationalize every event, stood up and began pacing. "Okay, so this place is haunted. Fine, a studio this old. It's bound to have stories. It's just color, right? It's atmosphere." The sound guy, Leon, said he heard the giggle too. May reminded him. "Leon was half asleep at the monitor," Alex shot back, his voice too loud for the small space. He was arguing with himself, not with her. It was feedback, a radio signal, cross-contamination from another frequency. As if summoned by his denial, the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered once, twice, then it buzzed, a high, irritating whine that drilled into their skulls. "Old wiring," Alex said immediately, staring at the bulb with defiance. Flicker, flicker, buzz, pop. The bulb extinguished, plunging the room into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the weak emergency light bleeding in from the corridor. Just the old wiring," Alex repeated, but his voice was strained. A cold draft, impossible in the windowless room, swept across the floor, brushing against their ankles. May let out a tiny gasp, and Mr. Ho simply closed his eyes. The silence that followed was worse than the buzzing. It was absolute, a heavy blanket, the same stillness Mr. Ho had described. Then, from the hallway outside, came a sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was small, rhythmic, the sound of a single marble dropped and rolling slowly on the worn linoleum floor. It rolled past their doorway and seemed to stop, right outside. "Nobody's out there," Alex whispered, moving toward the door. "Don't," Mr. Ho commanded. His voice was soft, but carried the authority of a general. Alex froze. The tap-tap-tapping started again, this time seeming to come from the other direction, as if the marble had passed them and was now rolling back. "They're playing," May whimpered, tears welling in her eyes. "They're just playing a game." "They are," Mr. Ho agreed, his eyes still closed. "And they want us to join." A sharp, metallic clang echoed from the end of the hall, the sound of the heavy fire door swinging shut. They were trapped in this wing of the studio, unless they wanted to walk the length of that dark corridor. The intensity of the quiet was shattered when the assistant director's voice crackled over the ancient intercom system, making them all jump. "Alex, May, Mr. Ho, we're ready for you on set 4. The classroom scene. Let's move." The sudden normality was jarring. Alex fumbled for his phone, using its flashlight to find the door handle. "Right, okay, work. Let's work." He pulled the door open. The hallway was empty. The emergency light cast long, warped shadows. There was no marble. The fire door at the far end was, as it always was, propped open with a rubber wedge. "See?" Alex said, letting out a shaky breath. "Nothing. Our minds are just... we're tired. We're feeding off each other's paranoia." May and Mr. Ho followed him, but they didn't look convinced. They walked quickly, their footsteps echoing too loudly in the passage. The air remained unnaturally cold, the stillness clinging to them. Set 4 was brightly lit, a stark contrast to the gloom. It was a perfect recreation of a 1970s classroom. Wooden desks, a dusty blackboard, anatomical charts on the wall. The crew was bustling, checking light meters, touching up the director's makeup. The energy was professional, loud, and entirely normal. "All right, people," the director called out. "This is May's emotional beat. She's remembering her childhood trauma. She's alone in the classroom. She feels the presence. Alex, you enter on her line. Quiet on set." May took her place at a desk in the front row. The crew backed away. The world shrank to the brightly lit rectangle of the set. "Action!" May closed her eyes, summoning the emotion. She delivered her line, about feeling a coldness, a memory of being watched. The director interrupted. "Cut! May, darling, that was lovely. But you're looking at the wrong spot. The presence is supposed to be behind you, toward the back of the room. You keep looking at the camera." May frowned. I wasn't looking at the camera. I was looking at the back row." The director sighed. "There's nothing in the back row but an empty desk. Love. Let's reset. Focus." They went again. May tried to concentrate, but a feeling of intense cold was emanating from the back of the set. She said her line, but her voice wavered. She couldn't help it. Her eyes drifted back to the last row of desks. 2 boys were sitting there, neat hair, khaki shorts, white shirts. They weren't looking at her. They were looking at the director, their heads tilted in perfect, mirrored synchronicity, as if fascinated by his commands. One of them, the one who had spoken to Mr. Aho all those years ago, slowly turned his head. His movements were fluid, like a doll. He looked directly at May, and he smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was wide, fixed, and utterly vacant. May screamed. It was not a cinematic scream. It was a raw, terrified shriek that ripped from her throat. "Cut!" the director roared, throwing his script down. "What is it now? May, you're ruining the momentum." Alex rushed onto the set. "May, what's wrong? What did you see?" May was sobbing, pointing a shaking finger at the back row. "The boys! They're right there! The 2 boys!" The entire crew turned. The director, the camera operators, the sound guy, Alex. Everyone stared at the back of the classroom. It was empty. The desks were unoccupied. The air was still. "For God's sake," the director snapped, rubbing his temples. "There is no one there. May, are you on something? We're losing the light. Someone get her some water." "I saw them," May insisted, her voice hysterical. "Alex, you have to believe me. They were sitting right there." I don't see anything." "May," Alex said, his face pale. He desperately wanted to back her up, but he couldn't lie. He saw nothing. "No," May cried, grabbing his arm. No, they were there." "She's overtired," the director declared. "We're wrapping this scene. We'll pick it up tomorrow. Everybody out." The crew began to pack up, muttering about delays and dramatic actors. No one looked at May. No one believed her. She was isolated in her terror. Alex helped her off the set, his arm around her shaking shoulders. As they passed the crew, May felt utterly alone, humiliated and terrified. She looked across the soundstage, toward the shadowed area where the actors left their personal items. Mr. Ho was standing there, watching them. He hadn't been on set for this scene, but he had clearly been watching from the darkness. His face was a mask of grim understanding. As May met his gaze, Mr. Ho slowly, almost imperceptibly, nodded his head. He didn't look at the empty classroom. He looked just past it, at the dark and cavernous exit of the soundstage. He had seen them too. The polite boys were done performing. The intensity was rising, and May knew, with a certainty that froze her blood, that the real show was just beginning. The old actor sipped his tea and said quietly, "You know, those rooms weren't made for us." He explained that when the TV station was first built, a feng shui master had been hired to bless the site. He warned that storytelling attracts energy, not just human energy. To contain it, he advised building small and cold, dark rooms at the ends of hallways, with no sunlight and thick doors. "They act like vessels," he said. "They gather energy, so it doesn't roam around and disturb the living. People call them resting rooms, but maybe they were never meant for people at all." Sun knew the story. Every PA, every intern, every jaded cameraman had heard the old actor's quiet warning. It was station legend, a ghost story told over lukewarm coffee during the 3 a.m. graveyard shift. Tonight, Sun was on that shift, and the one before it. He was 22 hours into a marathon shoot for a new historical drama. His bones felt like glass, and his brain felt like cotton wool. The main studio was a mess of cables and half-eaten catering trays. He just needed an hour, 30 minutes, even 10. He stumbled down the long, echoing corridor of B-Wing, the oldest part of the station. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed in a sickly, flickering rhythm. At the very end of the hall, just as the legend described, was a door. It was different from the others. It had no window, no label, not even a room number. Just thick, dark painted wood and an old, tarnished brass doorknob. "They act like vessels." The actor's voice echoed in his memory. Sun scoffed, a dry, tired sound. "It's a storage closet." He was too tired for superstitions. He was too tired to walk all the way back to the green room. He grabbed the brass handle. It was shockingly, unnaturally cold. His palm recoiled for a second, but his exhaustion was a heavier weight than his fear. He turned the knob. The door swung open on silent, heavy hinges, revealing not a closet, but a void. It was a small and cube-shaped room, perhaps 2 meters square. There was no light, no furniture. The air that escaped was stale and cold, carrying a faint metallic smell like ozone or an old battery. No sunlight, thick doors. Sun stepped inside. He was so tired he didn't care. He fumbled in his pocket for his phone, planning to use its screen for a dim light just to make sure he wasn't stepping on anything. He pressed the power button. Nothing. The screen remained black, dead. "Great," he muttered, his voice sounding strangely flat, as if the small, dark room was swallowing the sound. He was too deep in to back out now. He shuffled forward into the center of the pitch-black space. Before he could even turn around, the thick, heavy door swung shut behind him. Thud, click. The sound was final, heavy, insulated, and the silence that followed was absolute. It was not just quiet. It was the absence of sound. He couldn't hear the buzzing lights in the hall. He couldn't hear the distant hum of the station. He couldn't even hear the blood rushing in his own ears. The room was a vacuum, and it was cold. The cold he'd felt in the doorknob was everywhere now, seeping through his jeans as he slid down the wall to sit. It was a damp, penetrating chill that went straight to his bones. He closed his eyes. 10 minutes, he promised himself. Just 10 minutes. He drifted, not sleeping, but sinking. The cold and the silence pressed on him. Then he heard it. It was not a sound from the hallway. It was a sound from inside the room. In the corner opposite him, a whisper. Sun's eyes snapped open. The darkness was total, oppressive. He held his breath, straining to listen. The whisper came again, thin and dry, like sand pouring over paper. It was a voice, but it wasn't speaking any language he knew. It was just sound, articulate, but meaningless. Sun's heart hammered against his ribs. He scrambled to his feet, pushing himself flat against the wall he'd been leaning on. "Who's in here?" he demanded. His voice was dead on arrival, absorbed instantly by the sound-dampening walls. The whispering didn't answer. It multiplied. Suddenly, it wasn't one voice. It was a dozen, then 50, 100. A torrent of hushed, frantic voices, all speaking at once, overlapping, climbing on top of each other. It sounded like 1,000 radios playing at low volume, all tuned to different static-filled stations. The room was full of them. Storytelling attracts energy. Sun lunged for the door, his hands slapping against the smooth, cold wood. He found the doorknob, his fingers wrapping around the icy brass. It wouldn't turn. It was locked, or held. He rattled it, then banged on the door with his fist. "Hey, let me out. Hello." The heavy, soundproof door mocked him. The sound of his own fist was a dull, fleshy thump, barely audible even to him. No one in the hallway would ever hear it. The whispering stopped. Abruptly, the entire room fell back into that thick, crushing vacuum of silence. Sun froze, his fist raised, his ear pressed to the door. Then, a new sound. From the corner, a wet, distinct clicking, like a large insect chittering, or like someone cracking their knuckles. Slowly, over and over. Click, click, click. Chit, click. Sun pressed himself so hard against the door he thought his ribs might crack. He was panting, but his breath made no fog in the freezing air. He stared into the opposite corner, his eyes straining, desperate to pierce the impenetrable black, and the black moved. In that corner, a patch of darkness began to separate itself from the rest. It was, impossibly, a shade of black darker than the pitch-black room. It was a hole in the world, an oil slick unfolding itself in 3 dimensions. It rose. It was not a person. It was a thing, a collection. As it unfolded, it gathered, pulling the shadows toward it. It had no shape, but suggested many. Sun saw what looked like a limb, then too many limbs, jointed at impossible angles. It was a swirling mass of something, a vortex of pure static. Sun was paralyzed. He was beyond screaming. His mind was simply trying to process what he was seeing. The thing, the energy, swelled to fill the corner, and inside its swirling, chaotic mass, Sun began to see faces. They were pale, flickering, and translucent, like bad television reception. A woman in a traditional ao dai appeared, her face a mask of silent grief from the historical drama they were filming. Her face dissolved into a soldier, his mouth open in a soundless scream from a war documentary archives. His face melted into a children's show clown, its painted-on smile grotesque and slow. Its laugh a distorted, low-pitched click, click, click. It gathers energy. The vessel was full, and Sun was in it. The entity moved. It didn't crawl or walk, it lunged. In one horrifying, instantaneous motion, it crossed the 2-meter room, expanding to fill the entire space. Sun was slammed against the door as the mass hit him, but it didn't hit him. It enveloped him. There was no impact. There was only the cold. A sudden, agonizing, burning cold that felt like being submerged in dry ice. And the smell. It was no longer ozone. It was a thick, rotten stench of burnt film, formaldehyde, and something anciently, terribly dusty. Sun opened his mouth to scream, and the energy flooded in. It wasn't a physical attack. It was a broadcast. The thing, the collection, was trying to imprint itself on him. He was instantly overwhelmed by a tidal wave of raw, unprocessed emotion. He felt the crushing grief of 1,000 fictional widows, the boiling, murderous rage of 100 villains, the agony of every reported car crash, the mindless, shrieking terror of every monster ever put on film. It was the concentrated, unfiltered essence of every story the station had ever told, all pouring into him at once. His mind was tearing apart. He was everyone. He was no one. The clicking sound was inside his skull now, a deafening, bone-rattling pulse. He was suffocating. The thing was on him, in him. It was a non-physical weight, pressing the air from his lungs. He was its new vessel. This is what the room was for, not to keep the energy in, but to feed it. Through the blizzard of static in his head, he felt one part of the mass congeal. A hand, made of cold shadow and flickering faces, gripped his chin. It was impossibly strong. It forced his head up. He was face to face with its core. In the center of the swirling, chaotic mass of faces and limbs was a single point of anti-light, a void, a swirling, hungry mouth made of static. It was ready to record him, to add his story, his terror, his death, to its collection. Clang, a sound, impossibly loud, from outside the door, the sharp, metallic sound of a key turning in the ancient lock. The heavy door was pulled open. A shaft of pale, buzzing light from the hallway cut into the darkness. The entity recoiled. It didn't hiss or scream. It simply retracted, like oil pulling away from a detergent. The entire mass collapsed, folding in on itself, and poured back into the far corner in less than a second. It shrank from a room-filling monster to a simple, dark shadow in the blink of an eye. Sun fell forward out of the room, collapsing onto the hallway's linoleum floor. He was gasping, choking, his entire body shaking in violent, uncontrollable tremors. He was covered in a cold, slimy sweat that smelled of dust and ozone. He looked up, his eyes wide with madness. The old actor stood there, his hand still on the key he'd taken from a sleeping security guard's desk. The actor didn't look at Sun. He peered past him, into the small, pitch-black room. He showed no surprise, no fear, only a deep, profound sadness. Sun tried to speak, but only a choked, clicking sound came out. "They are always hungry," the actor whispered, his voice heavy with grim knowledge. He reached out, grabbed the thick, heavy door, and slowly pulled it shut. The latch clicked, a sound of terrible finality, sealing the darkness back inside its vessel. "They were never meant for people," he said again, this time to Sun, who could only lie on the floor and weep. "The stories we tell are powerful. They leave echoes. The station created a library for those echoes, but the library is hungry, and it is always looking for new stories, just like this one. If you felt the chill from that room, if you heard the clicking in the dark, let me know in the comments. The energy has to go somewhere. Share this story, and subscribe for more before the lights go out. The third blackout was different. The first two were shocking, unnerving. The third was a declaration, when the studio plunged into that suffocating, absolute darkness for the third time, at the exact same syllable of the guest's story, staring at me. The silence that followed wasn't just an absence of sound. It was heavy. It was a physical weight pressing in from all sides, a tangible, cold presence that sucked the air from our lungs. In that void, there was only the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears and the 8 baleful, demonic red recording lights on the cameras. They weren't just indicators anymore. They were eyes. They were the only things in that abyss that could see, and we were trapped in their gaze. Someone whimpered. It might have been me, the guest, the man who had brought this thing into our sterile, controlled environment, was hyperventilating, a strained, rhythmic ha-ha-ha that cut through the black. The host, a seasoned professional who had laughed at a dozen fake psychics, was utterly silent. I ripped my headset off. I didn't want to hear the producer's frantic, useless questions from the control room. I threw the expensive equipment to the ground. The plastic clatter was obscenely loud, like a bone snapping. That was it. I was done. This wasn't a job. This was an exorcism gone wrong. This was a containment breach, and I didn't wait for the backup lights. I didn't wait for the director to call cut. I fled. I scrambled on all fours for a second, disoriented, my hands slapping the cold concrete floor. Before I found my footing, I ran. Not toward the control room exit, but toward the main studio sound door, the big one. I slammed my shoulder into the panic bar, and the heavy door hissed open, spilling me out into the brightly lit beige hallway. The sudden fluorescence was blinding, painful. It felt like surfacing, like breaking through ice into the air. But I didn't stop. I kept running. I sprinted past the green room, where the next guest was casually scrolling on their phone, oblivious. I ran past the shocked faces of the control room technicians peering out their window. I didn't clock out. I didn't grab my jacket. I hit the emergency exit, tumbled out into the cool night air of the parking lot, and didn't stop running until my hand was on the cold metal of my car door. I left it all. The job, the paycheck, my crew, all of it. I abandoned them to the dark. I got in my car, locked the doors, and just sat there, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. I quit the next morning via a one-sentence text message. They called, of course, the producer, the studio manager, even the host. I blocked every number. I couldn't explain to them what I knew, what I had felt. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a glitch. It was an invitation. The guest hadn't just been telling a story. He had been issuing a summons. And on the third try, they had answered. The 2 white figures weren't just at his car wreck anymore. They were in our studio. The blackouts weren't a malfunction. They were an arrival. They were turning off the lights to make the room more comfortable for themselves. The scars remain. They aren't the kind you can show a doctor. I can't work indoors anymore. Not in an office, and certainly not in a studio. The idea of being in a soundproofed, windowless room makes my skin crawl. I get panic attacks in elevators. I have to sleep with a light on, a dim salt lamp that casts a warm, weak glow, just enough to prove the darkness isn't absolute. But the worst part, the scar that burns the freshest, is the colour red. Any small, glowing red light sends a jolt of pure, undiluted ice through my veins. A phone's charging indicator, a low battery warning on a laptop, the standby light on a television. Every time I see one, I'm back in that studio. I'm back in the crushing void, surrounded by those unblinking, crimson eyes, and I feel the cold presence in the room with me. When I'm driving at night and the car in front of me hits its brakes, the sudden bloom of red light makes me flinch so violently I've almost run off the road. I work in landscaping now. I work outside, under the wide, open, unforgiving sun. It's the only place I feel remotely safe. I heard the talk show was cancelled. The technical issues were too severe. I never looked back. I never contacted anyone from the crew. I don't know what happened after I ran. I don't know if the lights ever came back on. I don't want to know. I was a production assistant on a stupid, sensationalist talk show. I was just there to cue the applause and fetch coffee. But I was in that room when something from the other side was provoked, and it pushed back. I didn't survive because I was smart or brave. I survived because I was the first one to panic. I was the first one to realize that we weren't just listening to a ghost story. We were in one. And I was the first one to run from the dark, leaving the others behind with whatever was glowing in it. I didn't win. I just barely escaped. The set of The Crimson Bride was dead. Not quiet, but dead. A heavy, electric silence pressed in on the crew, broken only by the sharp, repetitive click-clack of the massive Arri lights shutting off, one by one, then snapping back on in a different sequence. It was the third night this had happened. The air was cold, the digital cameras were inexplicably grainy, and the young director, Leon, was pale and shaking. He was losing the scene, losing the night, and losing his mind. "I can't work like this," he finally yelled into the darkness. "Someone fix the goddamn power." The studio's veteran line producer, Uncle Ming, didn't even look at the panicked electrician. He just sighed, pulled out an old Nokia phone, and walked to the corner. "It's not the power, kid," he mumbled. He made a short call, speaking in hushed Cantonese. "Ah, Lok Gore. It's Ming. They're being noisy again." "Yes, Studio 4. Okay, thank you." He snapped the phone shut and turned to the crew. 10 minutes! Leon was furious. 10 minutes! We're burning money. Ming! Who did you call? A better electrician? No, Ming said, lighting a cigarette. I called the landlord. 10 minutes later, the heavy soundstage door groaned open, spilling yellow hallway light into the oppressive dark. A man stepped through. He was old, maybe in his late 60s, wearing a faded polo shirt and grey slacks. He looked less like an exorcist and more like someone's grandfather who had just woken up from a nap. He didn't carry a wooden sword, or a bowl of rice, or yellow paper talismans. He didn't even have a toolbox. This was the man they called Lok Gore. He shuffled past the $500,000 camera package and the anxious $1 million actors, ignoring them all. The crew watched, baffled. Leon wanted to scream, but Ming put a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Watch," he whispered. Lok Gore walked to the center of the set, a prop-laden facsimile of a 1920s Shanghai opium den. He just stood there for a moment, looking up at the catwalks and the darkened grid of lights above. The air felt like it was holding its breath. The lights flickered, nervously. Then, Lok Gore shouted. His voice wasn't loud, but it was firm, imbued with a strange, resonant authority that cut through the silence like a gong. "How many times do I have to tell you?" he yelled into the empty air, his tone that of a deeply disappointed teacher. "Don't mess around when people are working. This is a job. Respect the work." Leon stared, his mouth open. The man was scolding an empty room. I know, you like the story." Lok Gore continued, his voice softening slightly, becoming almost paternal. "But you're scaring the actors. You're ruining the lights. If you want to watch, then sit quietly and watch. Otherwise, everyone goes home, the lights go off, and you'll have nothing to see. Do you understand?" He put his hands on his hips. For 3 full minutes, he spoke into the void, reasoning, chiding, and commanding. When he finished, Wish took a deep breath, adjusted his shirt, and simply clapped his hands once. "All good now," he said to Ming, his voice returning to that of a normal old man. "They'll be quiet. Let's continue." He shuffled out. The door clicked shut. A moment of stunned silence. Then, Leon, hesitant, called out, "And action." The actor delivered his line. The camera rolled. The lights, every single one, stayed on, bathing the set in a perfect, steady, unwavering glow. They filmed for the next 6 hours without a single glitch. Later, as the sun began to rise, Leon found Ming smoking by the craft services table. "You have to tell me," Leon said, his hands still trembling. "Who is he?" Ming took a long drag. "He," Ming said, "is the first one here, and the last one to leave." He pointed down at the concrete floor. "They call him Lok Gore, Brother Lok." The crew, they whisper, "Ghost King, Both are true. Ming explained, this studio, built in the 1960s, was one of the oldest in the city. It had seen hundreds of films, thousands of actors, and decades of intense, manufactured emotion, but it had also seen tragedy. Back in '78, Ming said, they were filming some big martial arts epic. A huge wire stunt went wrong. The rig collapsed, crushed 3 men. A fire started. A terrible, terrible night. So the studio is haunted by them? Leon asked. Not just by them, Ming said. It's haunted by everything. By the actors who died penniless. By the writers who poured their souls into scripts that never got made. By the sheer energy of 1,000 stories. This place is a library of echoes. They're not evil, Leon. They're just an audience, a very, very old audience. And sometimes they get bored. Sometimes they get excited. Sometimes they like to play with the new toys. But Lok Gore, what's his story? Ming smiled faintly. Lok, he wasn't one of the 3 who died in the fire. He was a young lighting apprentice back then. He was here that night. He was the one who ran into the fire to pull the others out. He saved 2, but his lungs were seared by the smoke. He was in a coma for a month. When he woke up, he was different. Ming leaned in. He claimed he never really woke up. Not fully. He said part of him was still in that fire, still with the men who died. When he came back to the studio, he said he could hear them. See them, the whispers everyone dismissed as the building settling. He heard them as conversations, the cold spots. He said it was just someone standing too close. He became the studio's caretaker, Ming continued. He never left. The spirits here, the old ones and the new ones. They don't see him as an exorcist. They see him as the senior crew member, the only one who speaks their language, the only one who's been here longer than them. He's not their priest, kid. He's their union rep, their ghost king. Suddenly, all the small, strange things from the past 3 weeks clicked into place for Leon. The clues had been there all along. The sound designer complaining about phantom audio on the boom mics, whispers that sounded like an old-fashioned audience. The props department swearing they'd left a teacup on the table, only to find it on the mantelpiece. The actress who felt a cold hand brush her neck during her big emotional scene, a touch that had actually made her performance more authentic, more terrified. They weren't malfunctions, they weren't attacks, they were critiques. Lokgor's words echoed in Leon's mind. I know you like the story. If you want to watch, then sit quietly and watch. He wasn't banishing a demon. He was telling the audience to shut up and let the show go on. Leon looked at the set, now empty and quiet in the dawn light. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt full. He realized with a chill that for the last 3 nights, they hadn't been filming in an empty room. They had been performing on the most crowded stage in the city. So, what do you think about the Ghost King, Lok Gore? Is he just a seasoned veteran who understands the psychology of a spooked film crew? Or is he a genuine master existing between our world and the next? This story reflects a deep-seated belief common on film sets across Asia, particularly in Hong Kong cinema. Filming, with its bright lights, intense emotions, and reenactments, is often seen as creating powerful yang energy that can attract or disturb the yin, or the spiritual energy, of a location. This is why crews often hold blessing ceremonies or make offerings before shooting, to appease the local spirits who, as the old staffer suggested, might just want to watch the show. Lokgor's character is a fascinating blend of practical foreman and spiritual mediator. He isn't an exorcist, he's a negotiator, perhaps using Taoist principles of balance to restore harmony rather than banish the spirits. He handles the supernatural the same way he'd handle a difficult actor, with authority, respect, and the understanding that everyone just wants to get the show done. What do you believe? Do spirits enjoy entertainment too? Share your own lights out experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next story waiting in the darkness.